Got it. All right, welcome everyone to the Environmental Communications Seminar and the Program on the Environment at the University of Washington. This is our first seminar for winter of 2023. Ooh, excuse me for just 1 second. I'm realizing I'm getting some feedback. All right. I'm your host, Sean McDonald. I'm a faculty member here in the Program on the Environment. We have a fantastic speaker to start off our quarter. We have Dr. Sarah McAnulty. She's a research assistant professor, science communicator, and founder of Skype a Scientist. Her seminar today is titled Communicating Science with Empathy. So thank you so much for being with us today, Sarah. Let's give her a big round of applause, virtual or real, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
I want to start off just by with our land acknowledgement. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land. I'm joining you from Seattle and near the Seattle campus on land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands of the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. On a more personal note, as a settler on the unceded homeland of the Duwamish people, past, present, and future, I express my gratitude to the Duwamish tribe and support their efforts to regain their recognition. While we meet today on this virtual platform, I'd like us all to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands that we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. And because of the Environmental Communications Seminar, I think it's important to think that these aren't just words, right? They have a deeper meaning. And I do think it is really important for us when we do these land acknowledgements to think critically about our place and where we, the land that we occupy. So for folks joining us for the first time, the way that our seminars work is that our guest will give roughly a 30-minute presentation or so before we jump into an audience-driven Q&A. And so for folks on the Zoom, please feel free to use the chat or raise your little digital hand if you have a question. If you feel like asking your question aloud, you can turn on your camera, turn on your microphone, and you can ask your question yourself. Or you can just, as I said, add it to the chat, in which case I will be sure to ask those questions for you. Okay, great. So a little intro for our speaker. Dr. Sarah McAnulty is an American squid biologist and science communicator. She's the founder of Skype a Scientist, a nonprofit organization that connects scientists and teachers around the world for live video calls. She founded Skype a Scientist in 2017 as a way to increase both trust in scientists and science literacy. She's published a squid coloring book in 2018. It's a very cool book, by the way. And in 2019, she went on a road trip in the southeastern US called Squids Across America Tour. I actually followed you on Twitter during that. It was an amazing tour. Not a world tour, but a US tour. After graduating from University of Connecticut, Dr. McAnulty became a research assistant professor in the same department, and she continues to run Skype a Scientist. She's an expert in cephalopods and social media, which is an awesome combination. She has an active presence on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. She's been featured in Nature, Forbes, NPR Shortwave, along with many other outlets for her work. So without further ado, I would like to once again give our guest a big round of applause and turn the floor over to her.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. All right, so we are going to be covering a bit of a history of a lack of trust in science, ways that you can get plugged into science communication today, some projects that I have going on, and then really focusing on personal connections and empathy, and how empathy needs to kind of be the core value when we're communicating science. Because right now, we are in dire need of effective science communication across the board. Here's just a couple examples. This Oh, I didn't update this slide. This is quite old. There's been way more cases and deaths of COVID than this. I updated it today, but didn't apparently transfer it over. The picture you're looking at here is of my home city, Philadelphia, totally flooded last year. We know that there are, fires. I still think about those poor little koalas in Australia. This is my home school district where I went to high school. This is, if you were rejecting a mask mandate now, fine. But if at the time when this was all happening, it was, at the peak of a time when you'd want a mask in a school, it's bleak. We know that we need more effective science communication. But on the bright side, luckily, where it really, really counts, most people in the United States are on board. About 60% of voters polled, according to Data for Progress, had supported the Green New Deal. And 79% of people have gotten at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. Of course, you'd hope that there'd be more folks who got the updated Omicron booster. That ranges between like 15 to 20%, depending on the state. But generally speaking, it may feel sometimes like no one is listening to us, but in fact, more than half of folks are. Truth denial is its own problem more broadly, and I won't be talking about that today. I'll just focus on science-specific problems in this talk today. So let's talk about like the origins, the history of science as being controversial in the first place. Certainly it was before the 1920s. We could go back to Galileo if we wanted to, but like the modern trajectory of science mistrust starts about in the 1920s when folks said that science causes moral harm. They weren't wrong. In the 1920s, this was the height of the eugenics movement. So one thing that I'd like us all to like really take away from my talk today is that oftentimes we think of science as being the solution to many of our problems. And I really do believe that for the most part, it does offer solutions to our biggest problems, but we can't forget that it has also caused an immense amount of harm. And so going into communication, you can't forget that, because you won't be as trustworthy if you can't like reckon with both of these things. You have to do that before you can move forward and be an effective science communicator. In the 30s and 40s, people felt that science left a moral vacuum in society. They viewed it as being a replacement for religion, and religion, has these moral codes that you have to go by. Science, in the view of the 30s and 40s, said that science does not. Certainly in the last 2 years, it's felt like that's a bit flip-flopped, but that was the vibe in the 30s and 40s. In the 50s, the common sort of outcry against science is that science is cold, rational, and not natural and organic and like love and Renaissance paintings and that sort of thing. Like those two things were in opposition. In the 1960s, the big thing was being anti-establishment, and science was distinctly viewed as part of the establishment. And so that was kind of most of the vibe of the anti-science movement at the time. In the 1970s, Christians opposed the perceived amorality of science being aligned with conservatives. And once these two groups like kind of got together, like the anti-science folks and the Christian evangelical crew got together, it's kind of all downhill from here. And so if you want to read more about this history, you can read Andrew Jewett's How Americans Came to Distrust Science. It's a long read, but really interesting. So let's remind ourselves of some things that we've done wrong that we need to always keep in mind when we're being science cheerleaders. Science created the atomic bomb. Eugenics was huge in the first part of the last 100 years. And it's obviously a huge problem. And it's also making a comeback in some circles, which is bad. It's excluded huge portions of the population and has experimented unethically on many populations. And these four things are pretty much just the tip of the iceberg here. So when we're advocating for science as being the solution, we have to have a little bit of humility going into those conversations. And there's a lot of work to be done. I really do believe that modern science has a lot of the answers to the problems that we're facing today, particularly with climate change, certainly with emerging diseases. And if we want to prevent further extinctions of animals, if we want to prevent a lot of human suffering, having folks be more science literate and trusting of science is going to help our case a lot. And so moving the needle here is going to require us as scientists and people who represent science to show our human side and to really get across the point and bring it home for folks that science has the potential for positive change here. So within my worldview, I'm trying to fix this in a couple different ways. One is with my day job. That's Skype a Scientist. It's the organization I founded in 2017. We're trying to mobilize scientists all over the world to talk with mostly students in classrooms, but some folks outside of that. I'd also like to encourage empathetic science lovers. I'd like to see you maybe get involved in some way after today, and also moving political needles wherever possible. As much as we might hope that individual actions add up, they do to some extent, but really we need governments to move the needles here to get things done in time to save many species and also like prevent human suffering. It's a big one. So part one, I'll tell you a little bit about Skype a Scientist and the work that we get up to here. So we work in 4 major ways. One, our flagship program, the vast majority of what we do is matching scientists with classrooms, scout troops, libraries, all sorts of groups to have Q&As about science. We also run live streams about once a month now. At the height of the pandemic, although with the numbers what is the height of it, whatever, a year and a half ago, it was every week. Now it's once a month. On YouTube, where we bring in a scientist and ask them questions. We have events for adults, and particularly in the last year, we've gotten super into communicating science via public art, and I'll get to tell you all about that in a moment. So the flagship part of our program, we offer students the opportunity to meet a scientist virtually. This is something that all of you can get involved in after this if you are a grad student or up, or you could also be a tech for a couple of years. That works too. If you're an undergrad, wait a little bit, and then you can join our program. The real heart of this is that we're emphasizing two-way conversation. This is not where a scientist comes in and gives a lecture about science. We want students to feel like they've actually had the opportunity to meet a scientist because we really want personal connection to be like at the source here. We don't want them to feel just talked at. We want them to feel like they talked with a scientist. And we offer that to teachers and scout troops and libraries and knitting clubs, book clubs, whoever wants to talk to a scientist totally for free. Here's how it works. The teachers or whatever group leader tells us what they want. They tell us the type of scientist and also who their group is comprised of. So for example, let's say we have a school in Brooklyn that over half of the students are Latinx. So we will do our best to match them with a scientist who's also Latinx because we want them to be able to see someone in science who looks like them. Now, we do our best there. So we can't always match it perfectly, but when we have a scientist available that fits that same group, we definitely will match them. The type of scientist, there are about 30 categories to choose from. And if a teacher has, like, let's say, I don't know, there's a scout troop that it's a Girl Scout troop, and a lot of the girls have been really obsessed with penguins that year. Who could blame them? You can use our little search database to find all of the people who study penguins and then request a penguin scientist by name and then be super specific, or just request any biologist. It's however they want to work with that. Our scientists tell us what they're comfortable with. They tell us the ages they want to talk with. We don't want to put a particle physicist who doesn't want to talk to third graders in a class of third graders. We don't want anybody to be uncomfortable while they're volunteering with us, and tell us how many sessions they want to have over the course of the semester. And we match everybody up once a week from this week until August, and then take a quick break, and then start again in September until Christmas-ish. Everybody's informed via email, and either party can reject the match. And if the scientist rejects the classroom, that classroom automatically gets rematched. We serve about 10,000 classrooms a year. This past year was closer to like 6,500. Teachers are burnt out, but we're doing our best to get those numbers back up to 10,000 a year. We're in about 75 different countries. We've served something approaching 50,000 classrooms in total since 2017. Again, it's totally free for everybody to participate. And we have a lot of scientists to choose from. So people can get exactly what they want. Generally speaking, the teachers are really, really positive about our program. There are just like, it's kind of amazing. Like, as the organizer, I don't see these sessions actually happening because I just give everybody their email matches and say, okay, go forth and talk about science. But then we ask them at the end, like, how did you feel about this? How'd it go? And a lot of really positive stuff comes out of it. We have a lot of examples of a student who's like not super engaged with science and then saw someone doing science in a way that they didn't realize science is done. For a lot of these kids, it's the first time that they're ever meeting a scientist or seeing like a real science example, not just like on TV. And their perception of what they thought a scientist did with their day and what they actually do can be wildly different. And that can be really impactful for students. So it does work. Okay, we also do Skype a Scientist Live. This is where we bring in scientists to do Q&As with live streams instead of individual scientist matching. It's easier for the teachers to hop in. Also for people who are bored at work, they often will log into that and watch it while they're eating lunch or whatever. And all those are viewed after on YouTube if you want to. So we've got like 100 or more sessions on our YouTube. Back before the pandemic began, I often brought science to bars for adults. And generally, we just want to have like a fun science activity that's super accessible and wherever adults were going to be anyway. I'll talk a little bit more about how I've kind of changed the adult-facing approach during pandemic times because I haven't gotten back into in-person events yet. But generally speaking, we're just trying to put forth like positive experiences with science. Back when I was in graduate school, one of my goals was, so I was at the University of Connecticut, and I lived in an area of Connecticut called the Quiet Corner, and a lot of bikers would go in the summertime up through that area and just like go on joyrides on their motorcycles. And as a result, there are a bunch of biker bars up in that area. And so what I would do, I would bring a bunch of like bioluminescent bacteria on plates and in little like vials and like little dissection scopes and just like stuff for them to play with. And my goal would be to try to get some bikers over and playing with something that they never would have thought they'd be playing with on that day before. And anytime I got a group of bikers to play, that was like a successful night. A lot of times people associate science with like very smart people, and people might also think that like they are not a smart person and therefore science is like not for them. And so as a result, they sort of build up this emotional barrier between themselves and science. And we want to break that down however we can. And so these positive, like silly, low pressure experiences with science, I think can be like a start toward not immediately turning the channel when you see a scientist come on the news, for example. During the pandemic, I've switched to weekly trivia nights. They're now monthly trivia nights on Zoom. So as a continuation of meeting people where they are at bars specifically, one of the projects that we just got funded a couple weeks ago is all about animal facts that are relevant to the people of Philadelphia, delivered via bar coasters. So people in Philly in the summer go down the shore. You've probably heard of the TV show Jersey Shore. We go down the shore in droves, drink a lot with our friends and families, and then come back to Philadelphia. And a lot of the times I have gotten the sense, growing up in Philadelphia, living there most of my life, that people aren't really like paying attention to the wildlife in the area, which is easy to do because when you're on the beach, it doesn't really look like there's much going on. And when you look out at the water, it's totally cloudy. You can't see the stuff that's swimming with you. Even if you're swimming with all sorts of stuff, you have no idea. And so I'd like to get people thinking about the wildlife that they're vacationing alongside while they're down there. So we're going to be distributing a bunch of coasters that have an animal fact on one side and then animal art from a local artist on the other side. And we'll be covering like ctenophores, so comb jellies. Sea angels live down the Jersey Shore. People definitely don't know that. And horseshoe crabs, the classic Jersey Shore, not crustacean, whatever they are. They might be crustaceans. Well, I should know that before I make a coaster about them. Anyway, and there's also a facts hotline that people can play with. I generally try to get creative with thinking like, where are people getting their information? Like where are they reading stuff? What are they engaging with? That doesn't rely on social media, because over time we've gotten super siloed in our social media landscapes, and we follow people who are very much like us. And so if you aren't already like following a squid biologist on Twitter, you're probably not going to get a lot of information about the wildlife that you're vacationing alongside. And so I'm trying to think of ways to like give people access to science information in their daily lives, that they don't have to like subscribe to. And so showing up to a bar and grabbing a beer, you can get that information without having to like opt into it, kind of. And then we're going to be talking about street art in a moment, and that's very much the same thing. So I drive a car called the Squidmobile. It's just a RAV4, but I've covered it with squid. The back of it has a squid facts hotline. You can text the number 1833 SciText, and you get a bunch of squid facts as you text back and forth with it. It may seem like a silly idea, but it's been wildly successful since I started it in 2018. So back when I first started it in 2018, it was like, ever wonder about squid? Ask me anything, the squid scientist at gmail.com. So it was asking people to, first of all, come up with their own question, send me an email, remember the email that was written on the back of my car, and then be bold enough to ask. And that was asking people, I was asking too much of people. So I switched it to a Google Voice number. That's the number you're seeing here. If you text this number, you will blow up my personal phone. So definitely use the other number, 1833 SciText. And then that was so successful that I had to switch to a robot because I was getting like too many texts on my phone every day. So that it switched to the robot, and now it works. So yeah, 65,000 people have reached out, which is wild. Back a couple years ago, when it was like maybe 10,000 numbers, I mapped out the area codes of people who were texting. Now, of course, when you get your phone for the first time, that is the area code that you're going to get. And you could move far away from that area code where you're actually living. So this is not a perfect representation of where people are who are texting the hotline, but it's, better than no, it's the best we could do at the time. Responses are often like, but like confused, like, wait, squid, why? And I think that confusion makes people want to engage. And generally, yeah, again, the results have been delighted. All right, the next thing we've been doing is slat tagging. Okay, so slat tagging is a street art approach where you take stickers and you stick them on stuff. Basically, that's like the whole thing. I had bigger stickers, but a bigger version of this. It says, want a squid fact, text, oh yeah, to 1833 SciText. So I mailed out like 500 of those stickers across the country. I went on Twitter and made people promise that if I mailed them a sticker, they would actually put it up in a public space. And so these are the addresses that I mailed them to. These have been placed on classroom doors, car bumpers, the backs of parking signs, electrical boxes, server checkbooks was one, community bulletin boards, like street lamps, all sorts of places all over the country. And that's been part of the reason why so many people have texted the hotline, because like a distributed effort of people have put them up in places, not just in Philadelphia where I live in my neighborhood, but all over North America. And so this is what it looks like out in the wild. These obviously don't have a call to action, but the rest of them all do. These are the most recent iteration of those stickers. So that's one thing that I'm doing. And then after I did that for a while, I was like, okay, how can we make this like more interesting? And so I started doing what's called wheat pasting. Wheat pasting is another street art technique. Basically, you take glue, you like paint it onto a thing, and then you put a piece of paper on there, just any old piece of paper. And honestly, the worse quality the paper, the better they last, because it like completely absorbs the glue. But that's a technique side note that you probably don't need to know today. And then you get glue back over the top of it. And so this and the slab tagging, these are both illegal. But different cities have different tolerances for this sort of activity. Philadelphia is a huge street art city. And so it's really like no one's going to bother anybody wheat pasting or slab tagging. It's just not going to happen. They've got bigger fish to fry in Philadelphia. So it's pretty accepted. This is not true everywhere. Like, I don't know if where you all live, this would be more dangerous to do, for example. But in Philadelphia, it's super common and accepted, and there's stuff on every corner everywhere. Anyway, these are bigger. They're I can collaborate with other artists. Like for this one here, I didn't design this. A street artist that lives in South Philly, his little logo is this little black cat, so he designed that one. And then we worked together to put them up around the city. Super cheap to make. All I needed was some paint pens and like the cheapest sketchbook available on the market. And they're more attention grabbing than a little sticker. Like, here's the little sticker that I have, and then here's the wheat paste that I'll be putting up in Austin this week, because I'm in Austin for a conference right now. So I'll be and Austin, thankfully, is another street art friendly city. Not as friendly as Philadelphia, but friendly enough that I'm going to do it. Anyway, so it's really, really cheap to do, really easy to do. If you're looking for something that's less illegal and more of like a gateway druggy thing into getting into this sort of thing, you can just use sidewalk chalk. Like, pick your favorite fact about whatever it is that you'd like to communicate. Go out there and chalk it on the street. This is where I got really, really bored during the pandemic, and I was doing this all over the place. This is a bunch of these are in Hoboken because I was visiting my friend in Hoboken. But yeah, it's low risk, easy to play with. And you can also kind of like play with your messaging. Like, maybe you don't want to spend the money on getting a bunch of stickers made and you want to see what prompts work best. Try playing with different prompts in sidewalk chalk to kind of be like your pilot before doing the next thing. One of the other things I've done since moving to Philadelphia again is become super involved with community groups. So I'm now the vice president of the Fishtown Neighbors Association, so that I can easily get science information to the community in a way that makes sense for the community that I'm working with. So I've collaborated with the library, the Philadelphia Library, Neighbors Associations, and whatever local group there is to you that's relevant to you, you can plug in and then get stuff off the ground. So one of the things we did was this like Philly nature bingo card. If kids got, or adults, we didn't put an age restriction on there. If they got 5 in a row, just like bingo, we'd give them a $5 gift card to the local ice cream shop. It was cute, and it got people to think about the wildlife that lives in our city, because a lot of folks aren't thinking about wildlife in Philadelphia. Like, it just seems like a trashy dead zone, but it's not. There's a lot of cool stuff living in our city. So that was a little project we did. Also went to a community event for Halloween. God bless Sean, who is a local marine biologist who agreed to be my squid for the day. But we had a table where we talked about squid facts. We did squid origami, and then, talked about squid. And also for all of my trick-or-treaters this year, they got a squid facts postcard. Each of these little things on the squid represents a squid fact, and then when you flip it over on the back, you get a bunch of squid facts, and then you get a little link to the origami tutorial. So I just try to think about, like, where can I get squid information or any information to people in a way that is like woven into their everyday life, like trick-or-treating, like going to the bar and getting a bar coaster, etc. All right, so those are all my little projects I got going on right now. Part 2 will be personal connections and why we need more of them. So the one thing that another thing, this is like one of the things that I want you to really remember from today, is that no one individual science communicator is a good or perfect science communicator for everybody. It's not going to happen. Like, my voice and approach to science communication is going to work for some sliver of the population. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, is kind of a doofus and says silly things, but he works for some people. Like, some people think he's great. So we need all of us to, not all of us, we need all of us who are interested in doing science communication to put themselves out there and be part of the ecosystem of science communication, because your unique voice is valuable because you're different from the ones that already exist. And so our lived experiences, our personalities, like where we grew up, the culture we came from, are all integral part of the success of our science communication. And so we need as many people doing this as possible. So like I said, science communication broadly is an ecosystem. Personal connections, like going to a museum as a field trip, that's part of science communication's ecosystem. People on science TikTok, Jada Elcock is like amazing at sharing shark facts on TikTok. Being a scientist on a podcast, whether that podcast is like a comedy podcast, like I was on Jim Jeffries' podcast a couple months ago. And that was a weird one. That was different from any podcast I've been interviewed on before. But it reached new audiences. So that I was cool with it. Public art, being a great TA is like part of science communication. But the one that I'm going to talk about mostly here is going to be personal connections. There are different parts of this ecosystem. There's like the entertainment niche, the like peaking of initial interest niche, the increasing of knowledge, like the base knowledge that might build onto a bigger career niche, and so much more than that. But one thing that I'd like to talk about a lot is personal connection. And unfortunately, it's really hard. It's the hardest one, I think, but I think it's also the most impactful. So empathy is a key ingredient for great science communication. No matter what you're communicating, you need empathy to do it effectively. And this is true when you're talking about like snake biology. Maybe you need to like think about what other people might find interesting about the snake biology, as opposed to maybe the thing that you happen to be researching, which might be like, you know, 2 proteins within a snake eye or whatever. Maybe that's like not the thing, but you zoom out, assess it all, think about your audience, and then pick the snake fact that you think is going to be most resonant with your audience. And maybe it's way harder than that, like convincing your family to take a COVID test before the annual Christmas party, like I had to do last year, that like nearly melted the whole family down. That was hard, but that was a higher empathetic lift, but still empathy needed to be the first thing that I brought forth before even thinking about having a successful interaction. So a lot of us, like, we are in silos. We think of ourselves in silos, but really every individual is a unique opportunity to like move science literacy and science trust forward. And so, like I said before, like we need as many of us trying to make these individual connections to move this forward. So when we're going to have tough conversations, maybe it's COVID related, maybe it's climate related, maybe it's something totally different. Think about where they're coming from. Try to not automatically just focus on what you disagree with. Like, just try to put that aside for a moment and think about what you have in common. Start with your common ground. Remember that on social media specifically, the biggest effect may be on the bystander. Like the person you're talking to may not be the be all end all person that you're going to convince, but the person reading the conversation between you might be. And remember that every individual who we get to feel good about science is a win. So think about when someone is angry or disagreeing with you, think about what they're afraid of. It's not always fear-based. And so you're going to have to assess your own emotional intelligence to move forward here. But often fear plays a big role in a lot of the things that ideologically we disagree about. So let's say they don't want to wear a mask. Maybe they're afraid to admit that the pandemic isn't actually over yet. Maybe they're afraid they'll never be able to live the lifestyle that they could before ever again. Like maybe they're afraid they're never going to get back there. Maybe if they don't think climate change is a big deal, a lot of the same fears may be at play. Maybe they don't think that they'll be able to live the lifestyle that they want to live. Maybe they're afraid to admit that it's real because it's legitimately scary. And so admitting that it's real is scary. Maybe they think that it'll cause financial ruin. Think about that first, because that can sort of help guide you on where you want to lead the conversation. From there, think about what within that you can relate to. What is your common ground with where this person's coming from? If they don't want to wear a mask, maybe wearing a mask is annoying. Maybe you both feel that way. I don't know if anybody is like, I don't think wearing a mask is annoying at all. It's a little annoying. So that could be something that you have in common. And maybe you agree that the pandemic is unpleasant. Like, who doesn't think that? So you maybe start there and then take it to the next thing. I was hoping that the pandemic part of my talk would be irrelevant by now, but no. So anyway, the climate change is a big deal. You can agree that climate change is scary. I think we're all on the same page there. Capitalism makes most people financially insecure, and that is not great. And changing your lifestyle is unpleasant, particularly for older people who've been doing it for a long time, living their lifestyle for a long time. And so maybe you can find there. So here's my like little roadmap for empathy. And this isn't like for everyone all the time. You may not want to do this, and that's okay if you don't want to have these kinds of conversations. But step one, agree, not necessarily with the full content of what they're saying, but agree with something. Find some kernel in what they're saying that you can agree with. Establish your common ground. So like, yes, establish your common ground where you're on the same page about something. And then bring in whatever you actually want them to hear. Because if you start just with the thing that you want them to hear, they might automatically go into walls up mode, which can make it really challenging. And then step 4, empathize, like in a sense, also agree again at the end. So here we go. What do you want me to do? Wear a mask forever. Let's agree with that statement. It would be totally ridiculous to wear masks forever. Step 2, establish common ground. I wish we could stop wearing masks. Step 3, establish the reality, but unfortunately we have another variant or whatever it is. This, I don't know, that is true again right now. And then step 4, empathize. It's just awful that we're still dealing with this. I hope it'll all be over soon. So you want to sandwich the information that you actually want them to hear between like 2 more soothing things so that they'll hopefully listen to you more. There is science communication research that backs this approach up. It's not, we're not just making stuff up here. Common mistakes that I see folks getting into, often online, but all over the place. The first is assuming that you're smarter than the person that you're talking to. You may be, you may not be, who knows? But even if you are, it doesn't matter because they shouldn't know that you think that. It will get you off on the wrong foot. Relying on shame, it's super effective for getting likes and retweets and that sort of thing, but it's not actually a super effective way to change people's behavior. If you shame them, they'll feel like pushed out of your circle, and you want to an isolated people, like I think that's a whole other talk that we could get into, what happens when folks feel isolated and alone. And it's another big problem that we're seeing in the world today. But generally, relying on shame is not something that I would recommend. Don't put too high of expectations on yourself. Thinking that you can like flip a person from being anti-vaxxer to be getting a vaccine or like anti-masker and slapping an N95 on is unrealistic. And that's okay. Like all you can do is try your best and move people a little bit as you go. And also, don't start a conversation if you've already like had a bad day, you're exhausted. You can't bring the full like empathy battalion with you that day, because these harder conversations are not something that are going to be effective on low patients. It's just not going to happen. I mean, maybe it'll happen, but it's probably not worth it. And you don't want to end up worse than you started. So you can offer to have private conversations with people. Often putting out like self-important posts on Facebook or Twitter are not really effective convincing strategies to get people to do something, but having like an individual conversation not in front of everyone can be more effective. Start with an easier sell when you're practicing. like I said, flipping anybody on the hard stuff in one conversation is really challenging, but identifying easier stuff to play with to kind of get your feet under you might be more effective. Another really important thing that might help you build more patience when you're having these conversations is that remember who your enemy actually is, who our enemy actually is. It's probably not a mom who just like wants the best for their kids. It's probably not the neighbor who thinks that climate change is going to make their like stock portfolio worse. The enemy is like the fossil fuel company who wants to put the like individual responsibility onto individuals as opposed to government legislation to change things. Like they're the enemy. So remember that when you're getting frustrated with folks. Another important thing to acknowledge broadly across the board is that sometimes people might get upset with you. You can do a phenomenal job. You can like bring your A game on emotional intelligence and empathy and still fail. You did your best. This work is really, really exhausting. And also communicating on climate and COVID has risks. We've seen across like the last 2 years, folks who have gotten a lot of attention, specifically communicating about COVID, have gotten themselves into sometimes dangerous situations. And that's another reason that I think focusing on personal conversations, like one-on-one, is a good way to go. But the alternative, which is like, you know, climate change getting much, much worse, that's worse, I think, than not suffering through these acknowledgements. But you know, everybody has their own decision. You might say, no, it's not worth it for me doing this. So that's fine. So you can do it. Please remember that the person that you're talking to is intelligent. Your partner may have awesome historical reasons for not trusting science that you really, there's nothing to be done about. Fossil fuel companies have paid an immense amount of money for people to think things that aren't true. And so you as an individual scientist are going up against a huge machine. So all you can do is your best and use your empathy however best you can. So I think for this group, we're going to roll into the Q&A given the amount of time that has passed. But I have some like little activities we can do. But I think we're going to roll into the Q&A from here.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. That was really interesting. There's a lot of really great information there. What I'd love to do now is encourage, I'd love to encourage folks in the Zoom to ask their questions. You can do that either by adding your questions to the chat, and I'll go ahead and share those with our speaker, or you can raise your digital hand. We'd love to hear directly from you if you have any questions at all for our speaker. And if you are joining us on YouTube, you can certainly type your questions into the comments there on YouTube, and I'll read those to our speaker as well. Let's see, I see a hand up. Sarah Davidson, do you have a question?
Hi, folks. Yes, I do. First off, Sarah, thank you for your talk. But one thing that came into my mind from your introduction, and especially at the end, is that your examples with empathetic science communication really seem to focus on those who distrust science. And I'm wondering how those methods can apply to folks that do trust science, but are dealing with issues on the other end, potentially people that are dealing with climate fatigue or climate anxiety.
That's a good question. Yeah. That's a very good question. I think I don't have a great answer for this, like already cooked up, ready to go. Certainly a lot of what I've been focusing on is taking people who aren't already completely like with us and getting them further toward that. I tend to like the group that's climate fatigued, that like doesn't want to hear anymore. That is kind of where the middle part of my talk comes in, because what that population is currently experiencing is what I personally am experiencing all the time. Like when I see a climate scientist like come on the news, am I really fully engaged and listening anymore? Like, I know that the polar bears are dying. That like crab story where like 2 billion crabs went missing or whatever that came out like 2 months ago. I was like, oh my God, I can't take any more bad news. And so part of that is like people taking care of their communities and each other, just like, you know, having events and conversations and stuff that are restorative and like fun, honestly, to like refill your tank and your emotional energy tank so that you can go and then continue being a pain in the butt to your senator or whatever that you need to do the next day. But that's also part of why I do the Squid Facts project. So the Squid Facts project is not trying to convince anybody to do anything. Like, we're just trying to have a silly time with squid. And I think that you need both. I think you need to both have the hard conversations where you're like doing the emotionally exhausting work of taking one person and moving them forward. But you also need to remind folks that like science the world remains a beautiful place full of wondrous animals and things to learn. And so you need to take the people who are exhausted and like just kind of refill their tank a little with joy and wonder. And so that's what I'm trying to do with the public art. Like, nowhere in the Squid Facts hotline is like, and by the way, some geographical ranges of cuttlefish are shrinking due to climate change. I don't even mention it because while that's true, that project is a refill the joy tank project as opposed to a call to action project. So that's why both of these things are things that I do at the same time. And also, like, the joy projects that dump joy into other people also bring me joy, and like being able to get up the next day and be like, oh my God, I have to have another COVID conversation or climate conversation, like doing the other projects balances that out.
Thank you. That was a great answer.
Thanks.
Sarah, I'm looking at the questions in the chat. We have some really good ones. One of the things that we have been talking about in our classes, or at least I should say some of the students who are really interested in communication, practical communication, are folks who are thinking about doing this professionally. And so one of the questions here from Brianna is, what steps did you take to become a science communicator? Did you ever take any communication classes in college along with your degree, or was it just a path you took once you graduated to establish your career? What was your, if you could sort of take us along your trajectory of getting into science communication more formally?
Yeah. So I'm going to say right off the bat, like, this is going to be a do what I say, not as I did situation, because I kind of stumbled into science communication. So I had every intention of being a squid biologist exclusively up until, and I was doing science communication throughout grad school. So I started grad school in 2013. I was super active in online science communication pretty much from then, from 2014, maybe. But I was doing it just for fun. I liked it. I hadn't even like thought it might be a career path, because I was like, well, obviously I'm going to do a postdoc and then I will be a professor at an R1 university and I will do squid biology. And I like, if the world were a better place, that's probably what I would be doing right now. But because I saw too many problems that needed fixing, that the academic squid biologist track wouldn't address, I felt like I couldn't do it. So did I take communication classes? No. Have I done any kind of training? No. It's been all in the field doing it on my own, but nobody ever hired me to do science communication. I made a nonprofit and then funded it from basically crowdfunding and a couple small foundation funding here and there. So that's how I got here. I just sort of did it. And I was so lucky to be in a lab in grad school where I had an advisor who was supportive of me doing this stuff. This is not possible for every graduate student. So I started grad school 2013, graduated grad school August 2019, started Skype a Scientist January 2017. So that was like 2017, 2018, most of 2019, where like I had a salary, I had health insurance, where I was building this nonprofit at the same time as I was doing grad school. And that without that safety net, I don't know how the heck I would have done it. I wouldn't have had a salary. We didn't bring in any money for the first 2 years. And then eventually I started raising money to enough that I could like exist for 6 months after grad school. And then we're more stable now. But there's a lot of jobs in science communication. And there's also some training that exists. Like there are some master's programs in science communication and that kind of thing. You really want to ask yourself, like, what job within science communication do you want? Do you want to be like the science of science communication type of scientist? Those exist. There are lots of them, but those folks are doing the science of science communication and don't have as much time for writing grants to get a river mural, like a river art mural done, which is like what I spent most of November on doing like other actual practitioner stuff. So like I'm a science communication practitioner, not scientist. But there are jobs working for podcasts, believe it or not. For like Science Friday, they employ like 30 people. A lot of small science communication nonprofits exist. Also, most, not all, land grant universities and other universities as well will have an extension office. So that's an office that takes the science that's being done at the university and communicates it and translates it relevantly to people in the community surrounding that school. The Penn State has a really amazing extension office. They do a lot of environmental education for the people in Pennsylvania broadly. Really good extension office over there. And so there are lots of them. That's another place that you could get a job. I don't know what degrees those jobs look for, but it's kind of variable. So
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the things that strikes me about your approach and some of the things that you shared is specifically thinking about the role of individual interactions. What do you say to, because I've had these conversations, I'm curious what you would say to those scientists and those who are interested in science communication who question sort of the bang you're getting for your buck in that sort of situation, right? I mean, that is intensive work to work on those individual conversations, whereas other forms of communication where you're reaching a broader audience, a bigger audience, you might have maybe broader reach. What do you say to that sort of argument?
that's a great question. So that's something that I think about a lot, particularly when I'm like writing success reports for people who I want to support me. Like maybe I will have X number of social media followers, but anybody who follows a squid biologist on social media is probably already interested in science, probably already would like support a Green New Deal or whatever. And those people are wonderful. And I'm glad to talk with them. I'm glad to continue communicating with them. But did we change anything by doing that? Like maybe a little, but not much. But I think sometimes like your dean or that you need to like report what you did to, or like the NSF granting organization, they want to see these huge numbers rack up. But I kind of push back against that. Not that you can't do both, but you really want to think about like how easy is it to get numbers that really, I don't want to say don't matter, but are less impactful than the individual conversations. Also, reading a tweet from someone, watching a TikTok from someone has like a certain amount of impact on their life, but having like an individual conversation or relationship has way more impact on the individual. So you have to think about like how much these things, like how many people are you reaching and to what extent are you changing behavior in that audience versus the other number and that impact. Like that's hard to quantify. And I don't have solid answers on that quantification. But I see where they're coming from, but I think that you can do both. And also I acknowledge that like a lot of professors are very busy. And so maybe they don't have the bandwidth to have a lot of these conversations, and that's okay. Do the best that you can. Like if you have a couple, that's great. That's kind of why I built Skype a Scientist. We're not really always, we're not having hard conversations. We're usually talking to like about the rain cycle or whatever we're talking with them about. And those aren't like the emotionally exhausting conversations, but I wanted a way for like thousands of scientists to all do a little bit of personal connection at scale so that it's easy for people to get involved. They can hop in, do the thing, and then go back to their day job. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And actually kind of bouncing off of that question, Kelsey asked, do you have some examples or an example off the top of your head where this sort of personal connection conversation went either better than expected or had an outcome that you were particularly happy about?
Yeah, I was in a parking lot of a motel in Arizona with the Squidmobile. I was just like loading my backpack into the car or whatever. And this guy came up to me and was like, Squidmobile, like, what's the meaning of this? And we got talking. He was a salmon fisherman up in Alaska, and he started telling me about all of this, a bunch of die-offs that he had seen, and like his experience of what had happened over the course of his career as a salmon fisherman. And he started just like asking me all these questions about climate change and like how squid populations are doing in Alaska, and like all sorts of marine biology questions. And he like started kind of like skeptical of like how climate change had a role in it and like what we had done and what was going on. And at the end of it, it was just, he went from like kind of not quite combative, but borderline combative to like really lovely. So that was a good one. I feel like that was a good experience. Another one that was very silly. I was trying to organize a vaccine clinic in my neighborhood. This was back, I don't know, right after the vaccine started rolling out. And I was walking around the neighborhood in Philly, hanging flyers for this clinic. And this, I'm gonna say like 55-year-old guy, this was like the middle of the day on a Tuesday. I was walking around handing out flyers, and he was like, I put a flyer up at a local like dive bar, and he was like, oh, so you understand vaccines? I was like, I understand vaccines decently well. Yeah. I have my PhD is in molecular and cell biology of squid, but like, I'm still doing pretty good with our immunology stuff. And so he's like, I'll buy you a beer if you explain vaccines to me. And I was like, this is probably a bad idea, but like, whatever, why not? I can give this a shot. And then like over the course of like that beer and like 3 more shots, we like got into the weeds about vaccines. And it wasn't just him listening to me. He was like, he started very like, no way, like, I'm not going to take a vaccine. Like that's a device by the government to track me, that sort of vibe. And I don't think that guy probably got the vaccine. He didn't come to my clinic, but there were like many other people who were just like, who put down their phones and watched this happen. And like, I like to think that was successful. And I've had more successful conversations like that are not quite as memorable and wild as those two. But yeah, those are my 2 examples.
That is awesome. Thank you for that, Sarah. I'm seeing the time, and I want to be respectful of your time, and so I want to leave just with this last question because we have so many folks in the Zoom here who are students who are thinking about a future career where science communication is important. What do you think they should be doing right now to sort of prepare to be more effective environmental communicators moving forward? What's one piece of advice that you might give them?
Yeah, I would just say to practice now, like practice on social media. If you want to like think about the approaches that you would like to be like doing your main science communication through, or you could just acknowledge right now that you don't know which way you'd like to communicate science. Try a bunch of different things, whether it's a bunch of different social media platforms. Like maybe you like still images and like illustrating more than you like making videos on TikTok or vice versa. Just play around with stuff. See if you like long form writing. See if you want to try street art. See if you want to try any number of things, and practice now because the process of practicing will build up a portfolio for you. Like you might not be thinking that these little projects that you're trying here and there are like super important, but you never really know what's going to stick and what lessons you're going to learn along the way. And so I think just like doing it now, not asking permission from anybody to get started and just doing it will be really valuable, both in your skill set development and also at the end of it, you'll be like, look at these things that I've made. Like, this is how I can communicate science. And that will help you get a job for sure, even if you don't necessarily have like the training, coursework, whatever. Showing that not only do you want to do it, but you have done it and it works is really valuable.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. Dr. Sarah McAnulty, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's give her a big round of applause.
Thanks.
I really do appreciate you joining us. For folks on the Zoom and those joining us on YouTube, please Join us again next week, same time. Our speaker next week will be speaking specifically about visual arts and the environment, especially environmental justice. That's Carol Roshana Williams. So we'll see you all next week for that presentation.